Thank you all for inviting me here today, and particularly Enercan and QWeb. I'm going to talk a little bit on the wood products markets in China and the opportunities, but I'm actually going to cut some out because I'm cognizant of the fact that we're getting close to cocktail hour, and JC has touched on some of them already. So we're going to address some of the major issues that the wood products people face in China. First, I want to set some context on the size of the market, talk about how Canada's doing, what are the biggest opportunities, and who some of our competitors are, what we're competing against. The importance of the China market, you've heard it in other terms, but from a wood products perspective, nearly 1/4 of all the world's sawn wood is consumed in China. Nearly 1/2 of all the wood-based panels. This is not a market we could ignore even if we wanted to. The important thing there is that's not the top of the market. RISI published a study a few years ago where they were saying that they think there's going to be 60 million cubic meters additional forest products and timber imported into China by 2025. This is a growing market. It's a vibrant market and it's a changing market. Where do we stand? Well, if you look at softwood lumber, which is our largest export, 13%. Now, that may not sound like much, but as you may have noticed, the US market is booming. That's where a lot of our wood tends to go when times are good. Equally, you will remember a decade ago when times weren't so good and we couldn't give it away. So it's important to have those diversified markets when we have problems in the US market. It's the closest market. We're always going to depend on the US market, but we need other places to send our wood. Even more important for hardwoods, 19% of all hardwoods are sent to China. And that's a very significant part of Canadian hardwood exports. So if we look at our exports in terms of dollars, and for wood products, this is the Chapter 44 of the HS code. So it does not include pulp and paper. It's only our solid wood products, panels, components, things like that. As you can see, in 2008, we didn't do a whole lot of business in China. It was pretty small, 220 million roughly, Canadian dollars, 220 billion. If you look at the 2017, pardon me, 1.7 billion for 2017, so significant growth. If you follow the bottom blocks on there, a lot of that is softwood lumber. And that is the primary item that we've been sending over the last decade to China. It's not the only item, but it's the primary item. The hardwood exports, if you look to the yellow lines, has grown fivefold over the last decade. That has gone to nearly $100 million Canadian. I'd like to isolate softwood lumber for us for a second because that is the major export, and talk about how we rank in terms of volume compared to the rest of the world. As you can see in 2007, there weren't a lot of softwood lumber exports to China from anywhere. They were mainly a log import company or country, and they were mainly importing tropical logs and logs from Russia. There was a few things that dramatically changed the market, and I know anybody from the West has heard this 100 million times, but on the assumption that some of you haven't, 2008, Russia put in a log export tax. China got most of their softwoods from there. There was a huge drop in wood imports into China over the next few years. The Russian lumber capacity in the Far East and Siberia was not up to fulfilling that capability just to switch over. And China wasn't ready either. They were set up to mill logs. So suddenly, 2008, you start to see some significant growth in lumber imports into China as China started to look at alternatives to logs. At the same time, I'm sure you all remember, the US market was in the tank. There was backhaul rates that were attractive from the West Coast, and there was this little mountain pine beetle that was causing havoc and creating low grade in all the mills. A lot of lumber got shipped out in those quite challenging times, and it was mainly low grade going into China just to get it out of North America. If you follow along, 2013, we were still producing lots and lots of low grade and shipping lots of material into China. And that was the peak of the market for us. We've fallen back to 25% of the Chinese market. And a lot of that is due to the fact that the US market is booming, and wood doesn't have magnetic properties, but if it did, it would just glom onto the US market. You also see the fruits of the investment in the Russian lumber production here. When they couldn't sell logs anymore, they started to invest in lumber capacity. And that's all going to China. I've got another slide a little later that'll show you that a little more clearly. In the last few years, you've seen the fruits of a Scandinavian effort, particularly Finnish and Swedish, effort to get into the manufacturing sector in China. They're very, very heavily invested in that market. We did the China Market Development Strategy in 2016, and their goal was to get to 1 million cubic meters a year. They've exceeded it already. So very serious people in that market. They want to be there. It's not the market of last resort for many countries. For us, we're moving beyond shipping low grade. We need to move up the value chain. And that means getting out of the blue and red pies. The low grade goes into concrete forming, and it goes into furring strips. And that type of material is not where we need to be anymore. We're trying to get into furniture and wood product, or the wood construction. And I think probably the biggest thing to remember about that is market development is really slow. 2003, wood did not exist as an eligible product in the structural code in China. So to get dimension lumber in wood construction has been a very long and involved process, and you need to realize that that's going to take time, but I think we're on the cusp of some really good things right now. What you can see also in the far graph, the close one here, is that over the years we have seen a change. There is more two and better grades going into China. It used to be just ship the low grade across the pond. That's not the case anymore. It has been a problem for producers to actually get value for that premium product, but they're working on it. I'm going to slip relatively quickly through some of these factors because they've been covered by JC already. That is rural Jiangxi. In a few minutes, we're going to look at urbanization, and you're going to say goodbye to that because there isn't going to be a lot of houses out there in the future. Why China? It's a market you can't ignore. The IMF actually says that between 2011 and 2015, 35% of global growth was in China. 35%. Through to 2020, they're predicting a third of global growth will be due to China. Yes, it's a huge economy, but it's making an enormous difference in the world. There was rampant growth for a few years. It was unrestrained growth. We'll talk about the implications of that in a few minutes. And it is slowing down. And you've all read the reports, you know, oh, the Chinese economy is going to tank and there's problems here. You know what? Their slowing down is to 6 to 7% over the last 2 years. That's still 2.5 to 3 times higher than any of our major customers. So slowing down, but major. Huge. You look at urbanization. JC, I could be wrong, but my guess is that 60% is 2020. They're looking at moving. That was from 15 in the 13th five-year plan. 100 million people have to find new homes. That is going to drive the construction industry in China. The ups and downs of the Chinese economy won't be the major force on the construction industry in the next few years. And as you can see with that graph has not really changed. In 1978, there was less than 20% of the population in cities. That has been a driving trend for years. That's not going to go away. The thing that we need to remember from a wood products industry is urbanization will drive construction, and the citizens who now have some money to invest, having sold up and moved, they can't send their money overseas. Real estate becomes a serious investment opportunity for them. Those urban consumers, As you can see, the graph itself is growing. The number of urban consumers is growing. And this is a graphic from ANZ Research, and whether you agree with their 2030 forecast on the number of affluent consumers or not is irrelevant. The fact is, the number of affluent and middle-class consumers is growing dramatically. So we see not only a growth in the number of consumers, but the amount of wealth that they control. That's critical to our business. These are the people that rent and purchase houses. These are the people that furnish those houses with furniture, tear everything out, redecorate. They actually go on holidays. They go to local resorts 2 or 3 hours away. Those are all drivers for wood. That's what's going to drive our opportunity in the future. There are significant market niches that develop in resorts, in prefabricated construction, and furniture markets, mainly because of this urbanized, growing wealth. So we talked about furniture in a few minutes. One of the questions I very frequently get asked is, given the labor rates and the land costs in China, are they not pricing themselves out of the furniture manufacturing market? Well, they might eventually, but right now, they own roughly 40% of it worldwide. And that translates to 856 billion renminbi, basically over 130 billion US dollars a year. And it's growing. When we look at the next graph and we talk about exports, their furniture production is growing. In 2016, it went up 8.6%. Now, the important thing to me is not that they control 40% of the market, but that 60% of that is actually consumed at home. $80 billion of furniture never leaves Chinese soil. And that, when we talk about market opportunity, we're not talking about raw material being exported to China to be manufactured at the lowest possible rate and exported back overseas. It's being exported to niche manufacturers who are producing for key Chinese consumers. I don't actually have the percentage of that furniture that is wood, but there are estimates in the Chinese business community that wood furniture companies make up over 60% of all furniture companies. So a good portion of that is wood furniture. To address the export furniture, the way to read this graphic is each one of those bars above China represents a year. So you look at the trend, you got about $35 billion in 2010, peaking up to 2015 at $54 billion, and then going down in 2016. The furniture production in China didn't go down, but their exports went down to about 50 billion US. But yes, costs become very important over time, but there's not a lot of capacity in the world to take up that $50 billion worth of export furniture. It's going to be a while before somebody else, Vietnam at almost 10 billion exports a year, they're not going to overnight come up with the opportunity to build another $50 billion worth of export opportunity. So are you investing in Chinese manufacturers with the thought that you're going to lose that market? I think you're pretty safe for quite a while. And if they work and manufacture furniture with pollution controls and they work to be efficient, they're going to stay around for a lot longer. If they're focused on the domestic market, they'll be around longer still. Now, it sounds all these positive things, demand due to urbanization, demand in construction, furniture market looks good. That's all great, and we can take positives from those. There's also some positive opportunities because of some negatives for China. And JC touched on them a second ago. China is a signatory to the Paris Accord. They are not happy to be the largest emission in the world. They have, unfortunately, after a couple of years of stable emissions, looks like they rose about 3.5% last year. Numbers weren't published when I looked last month. The cause is because they had economic growth. Natural gas prices rose. They burn more coal. And that's a huge problem for them. They're very strongly pushing towards more carbon neutral solutions. One of their major issues is construction. It causes a lot of emissions. It also causes a lot of pollution. That's northern China. If you happen to be a person standing in any of those purple, red, or brown areas, you're doing something that's hazardous to your health. The Chinese population is not happy about this. The government realizes that, and they are pushing very strongly for pollution controls. This is the 2.5 particulate matter emissions, and this is not, I did not go out to pick a bad day. I just happened to download this one day from the Berkeley Earth site. They have sensors all over, and you can get pictures that are pretty well completely purple and brown. That's bad news. And they are actively trying to change it. They're not just wishy-washy papering over it. They're actively trying to change that. They're changing it by focusing on green development and low carbon construction opportunities. So those are the drivers. Where does that come to for us in the wood industry? There is significant opportunity for prefabricated solutions that have controlled pollution, low carbon options, and green development. There's also significant opportunity, remember back to our resort, our urbanization, people wanting to spend money on vacations. Those people want to go to a nice, clean resort area a couple of miles from home, or a couple of hours from home. And manufacturing, particularly products for the domestic market. I'd like to talk a little bit further about prefabrication and green development, because I think for the vast majority of the softwood lumber, that's what's going to raise the product that we ship to China into a real value-added product, is selling wood into their prefabricated systems that they need to develop. And why do they want to do this? Well, they want to increase their construction quality. They're not known for construction quality. They also want to increase their building lifespan. They want to reduce on-site waste, pollution. When you add all those people to the urban area, you can't then line 10 concrete mixers up and block the road. They assume that 15% or more of the concrete dust, or the dust in Beijing, is because of construction. They want that out of Beijing. They want that out of their cities. They want that in a manufacturing plant with pollution controls, and then they want things put up piecemeal on site, this piece, that piece, that piece. So they want all that controlled. Green development is not inextricably linked with prefabrication, but it's closely linked. They're both ways of getting to the point where we can actually produce a better product on site, and with wood, it's a zero carbon option or a lower carbon option. FP Innovations has a carbon model that they're working on with the MOHURD, Ministry of Housing and Urban and Rural Development in China, and it's actually getting them through the door to talk to people because they're interested in knowing how much avoided carbon you have when you construct this out of wood as opposed to the same thing out of concrete. So it's getting a lot of attention. Are they really serious? In a couple of years, they expect to have 15% of all construction done with prefabricated pieces. It's not all wood. Well, this is not the promised land. But wood has some significant advantages. We can't build a 26-story building with wood. And there are 26-story buildings all over, 40-story buildings. We're not in that market yet. But we can build a significant portion of the 5- and 6-story buildings with wood now. We can put infill and exterior walls in taller buildings. And so there's significant opportunity if we can panelize, add value that way, and get them into buildings. FP Innovations, again, has provided a forecast, 10 billion board feet of structural wood a year, over 2 billion board feet of non-structural wood. That's all developed through Canada Wood and NRCan and the other provincial funders, all the work that they've been doing over the years since 2003 to develop that market. I particularly want to highlight this particular slide. It's just one of many, so if this isn't your opportunity, I'm sorry. I could have put 20 slides up here. But Quebec Wood Export has been working actively to get local manufacturers into the Chinese market in, I can't call them pre-manufactured housing because that has a tariff. Pre-manufactured housing components does not. So you look at that, that's all shipped from here. Now, that's a really good way in a country like China that doesn't have pre-manufacturing capabilities yet for wood. They don't understand wood on a broad scale. They've never really had it around very long. So here's the opportunity. We ship, we get into a project. Eventually, the Chinese are going to want to be partnering with you as a manufacturer, and you're going to be able to use your engineering, your construction know-how, your on-site capabilities. That's all going to be something that you can sell in a JV along with pieces. Now, a lot of that wood and those pieces, you might add value here, but a lot of it's going to have to be done there. China likes to do it at home, and we can expect in the long term they're going to want to do all the prefab there. That doesn't mean our knowledge, JC referred to services, isn't worth something. It is. They don't have this knowledge there right now. I want to touch on the Sino-Canadian Eco-District project. This happens not to be a prefabricated system, but it equally could be prefabricated. What they've done is they've taken Canadian sustainable growth patterns, and they've taken community infrastructure ideas from Canada and wood frame technology. And between Moherd and Natural Resources Canada, in 2012, they came up with the idea to work in the Sino-Canadian Eco-District. And this is a replicable community that they're actually building. They have a demonstration site, the bottom picture, that uses mass timber, glulam, and then the top site is actually stick-built, but as I say, could equally be a prefabricated facility and can be built anywhere. It's built using reduced energy costs because it's engineered to Super E design. This kind of low-carbon opportunity, this opportunity to show people that it's not just what you build with, but how the building acts afterwards, is part of the solution for China's energy problems. It's part of their solution for their emissions problems. And if we prefab it, it's part of the solution for their particulate matter and dust problems. So we can actually now provide solutions, whereas before, 2003, we weren't actually in the building code. So, I mean, one can argue that maybe we're not as far advanced as we are. I think in 15 years, to be considered part of the solution for some of their problems is a huge, huge leap forward. I think JC referred to the level of engagement. I think part of the reason we've had success is the support from Natural Resources Canada, from all levels of government. Premier Couillard was over meeting with BSD Tata on his recent mission. That kind of government and ministerial support matters an awful lot in China. That's part of the reason why we actually have a lot in the building code now that didn't exist 15 years ago. I don't work for Enercan, I don't work for QWeb. I'm an independent consultant, but I can tell you there is not another country in the world that has made that progress, and a lot of it has been the willingness to act as a team. So, we also talked about resorts. What's so special about resorts? Well, you know, you can prefab a resort, but the nice thing about resorts is all the codes and standards have been done in the previous 15 years. They already exist for up to 5 stories. If you develop that opportunity, you can go in and build it now. It's a big market, growing market because of the wealth. The biggest issue that we've got, building with wood, is convincing the developers and officials that in fact there's industry capacity. Capacity for design, construction, prefabrication. But the opportunity is there. And what better place to put a wood building than in a natural environment? That's a common theme that we hear. So certainly in short-term opportunities, this is great. You don't have to be green development. certainly you get more brownie points for having low carbon construction, and if you prefab it, you get even more points, and the developers are into that. But you don't even need to go there. There's opportunity without that. The other constantly developing opportunity, as we say, is manufacturing. Some of these pictures, Western red cedar blinds, ash furniture, Canadian white ash furniture, maple, and that's a hemlock bed. There are real opportunities for Canadian products. And if we think back to our urbanization graph and our consumption graph where people are getting wealthier, those wealthy people like luxury. The Chinese people that have money want to spend it on themselves. And affluent customers like those luxury products, and they actually like our Canadian maple, our Canadian hardwoods. They like the color, they like the quality. So that presents a real opportunity for us. We may not be able to compete with the Americans in many ways. They have different products but similar species. And if we can find niches in the Chinese domestic market for people that like luxury products, that's a perfect spot for us to be. We have work to do on that, but significant opportunity. There is growing opportunity also for softwoods. So if you're a softwood producer, you're not totally out to lunch. They are looking for, Canada Wood has actively got business development people on the ground looking for more opportunity in the manufacturing sector for softwoods. But I think what is really key there is that those opportunities are species specific, they're quality specific, and size specific. So it's not a one size fits all. You're not going to take what didn't ship to the US market and find a product that a luxury customer wants you to build for them. Challenges, I'm going to skip right over the business challenges because JC's going to answer that. He already talked about a few of them. I'm going to show you some work that FP Innovations has done fairly recently. This is a 10% slice of the softwood imports into China. And as you can see, there's a lot of wood going in that isn't ours. What is interesting to me is that our actual suppliers or people producing and shipping over there are actually reaching the buyers who are bringing almost 50% of the material into China. So they're reaching the right people. They may not be reaching quite enough, but that's a business-to-business relationship. The other thing is there's a growing US or Russian presence in the market, but we don't actually overlap with that. That big cloud at the top, I say that only because of the shape, not because of the politics, that's largely the Russian border. It's landlocked. There's no way for any other country to get wood there economically. I believe there's something like 200 Chinese sawmills in Manchukuo, which is one of the largest land ports. They have a lock on that market, and they're going to. We're not competing in that market. But this is recent FP Innovations work, and what I found really interesting was they're split down the coast where we do ship wood and where we're actually competitive. Now, this is softwoods, so hardwoods will have a different economic basis. But as you can see, there's areas that we specialize in, and there's areas that the Europeans now specialize in, and there's areas that the US is coming in very strongly. So what that means to you as a manufacturer is if you're selling a product into one market or another, you're actually competing with a completely different country, a different product, and perhaps a different quality. I'm going to throw you up some pictures here. These were lent to me by FP Innovations from a recent trip Kyle Miller made. He's just come back from China. And with the exception of the Russian rail car, that actually they took last fall, that's some pretty nice looking wood. That rail car is actually, I believe, mill run. And a quick estimate walking by it, the guy said that 80 to 90% premium grades. So the people you're competing against are not dumping in the market. This is actually some pretty nice stuff. Closest and farthest, that's spruce. The others are pine from Russia. Here's some New Zealand and Swedish wood. That Swedish bundle looks absolutely pristine. There's no wane, There's no warp. There's no check. It looks lovely. I thought of this morning's presentations looking at the bundle from New Zealand, and I'm not pointing fingers at all, but the warp and twist makes a manufacturing solution and pre-manufacturing awkward. Here's some hardwoods: American oak, German beech, and American poplar, and Quebec hardwoods on the ground in China. Really quick summary of the opportunities then. Industrialized construction, it's what's going to take the softwood lumber out of the lower value pie, pieces of that pie, and bring them into higher value wood construction. If you marry that with green development, and we tell a really positive story that has a lot of legs in China, I believe. There's a lot of different products, a lot of different housing types, and with the NRCan work on tall wood, I think what we're going to find is that opens up mass timber opportunities as well. Resorts and manufacturing. And one 30-second plug. If you're interested in China, talk to your associations, because anybody who's a member of Canada Wood, and QWEB, Quebec Wood Export Bureau, has been a founding member of Canada Wood. They've been in China a long time, and they have a lot of experience in digging up opportunities, evaluating them. And also the trade commissioners on the floor in China, ready to go, ready to help.